There. I hope everybody's doing well. I hope that some of the things I've been discussing about habits has been helpful. Do let me know. I'm not getting much feedback, so I can't tell whether you appreciate it or not. So I would really like a few comments on that. But let's go on. And today I want to talk about triggers. Um, in other words, what are the things that get you to do whatever it is that you don't want to do? You've looked at it, and you've analyzed it, and you've measured it, and things like that. But let's get a little bit more specific now. So when I'm saying triggers, and I'm going to use an example, two examples today, basically is somebody who wants to stop eating a lot or eating junk food or whatever, and somebody who wants to quit smoking. It doesn't have to be those two, but they just lend themselves to my examples better. Okay. So let's just talk about somebody, say, who wants to stop smoking. Stop smoking. There we go. And so let's say, for example, that somebody who smokes tends to want to smoke after a meal. Okay. And they may say that, oh, I just get triggered because it's the meal or it's the table. Okay. Let's stop and look back at a moment. Let's suppose that smoker has a small child, and the small child has its own bedroom, the baby. Okay. So the smoker's just had something to eat. The baby cries, and the smoker goes off to the baby's room. Does the smoker have an inclination or a desire to smoke while it's inside the baby's room? Let's say the baby's crying, the smoker has to hug it, try and pacify it, change the diaper, whatever, and then leaves and goes on about the evening. The smoker is no longer at the table. The smoker has had a meal, but it got disrupted because he or she went to the baby's room. Is there still the same desire to smoke? This could be a really major question for you to consider. Because what you're looking at in this, or the smoker is looking at in this particular case, is it the meal or is it the location of the table, the timing issue, so to speak? Let's suppose he's going to take care of the baby, come back, done dishes, watch TV, whatever, goes back and sits down at the table later on, 2-3 hours later, whatever, and decides to smoke. It could be the table. So this is what I'm saying when I'm saying the triggers. Are we looking at specific instances that trigger the desire to smoke? Or what's going on here? Because if it's the table, then maybe just the way around this particular habit is to move away from the table after a meal. So maybe the smoker has the meal and then gets up and leaves the table, goes in and clears the table and does dishes or something, but to get away from the table. If it's the meal, then the table or any place else won't matter as much. Now, it will, if they say, like in the example I gave, go to the baby's room where the inclination is not to smoke, so that may break this particular habit. So therefore, if you take these pieces together, you can begin to get a sense of how to possibly break a habit that exists if you recognize where that habit gets triggered. Okay? Does this make sense? So again, we can take somebody, or not again, well, again, from a sense of the last couple of weeks, but not today. But let's take somebody who eats, and maybe the idea is, I tend to overeat when I sit down and watch Netflix and binge watch TV. Okay, so we've got issues here of the watching TV. Could also be the place where somebody sits, because usually when people sit down and watch TV or things like that, they tend to have their chair. I mean, if you're going to sit and watch TV, most people, you can just sort of like indicate who's going to sit where, right? So what would happen if you go to watch Netflix? Don't bring the bag of chips or anything. Just go to watch Netflix or whatever you're going to watch, but sit in a different chair. You talk with the rest of your people in your household and you swap seats for a week. If you don't bring the chips to your chair, do you have the same urge to eat? Quite possibly not. So then what we're looking at is it the idea that you're getting the urge to eat because you're sitting there watching television, which would happen regardless of where you sat. You could be sitting on the floor. You could possibly, even depending on how the house was set up, be sitting in another room. And if you still have that same urge to eat, it might be connected to what you're doing with the television. If switching to chair and putting into another chair or lying on the sofa or some such thing like that, and you don't have the same urge to eat and don't have the bag of chips with you, now this is a key, because if you're switching chairs, don't take the bag of chips with you. because then that you're setting yourself up for that. What you're doing is all you're going to do is you're going to go in and say, we're going to watch Netflix. So you switch chairs. And as you're sitting there, do you have the same urge to snack? Maybe, maybe not. So what you're looking at here is the issues of, is it, in this case, is it the place you're sitting? And it's just that you're so used to, or you've developed the habit of coming in and watching TV and sitting in that chair and eating your Doritos or whatever. Or is it the television, or is it the chair? Because what you're looking at here is later on, if you're not watching TV, let's say you've got company, or maybe you're playing games with the children, or for some reason you come in and sit in that chair in mid-morning or mid-afternoon or any other time of day, do you get the same urge to start eating and nibbling? Because then it may be in being in the chair, that connection is where you start getting that urge to eat. Maybe it's not the chair, maybe it's just the fact that you're watching television. When you begin to understand where your triggers are coming from, then you have a better chance of being able to figure out how you're going to divert and do something different so you don't continue to do the same behavior. Does this make sense? Now, if it's the chair and you're watching Netflix, then just go and sit in a different chair until you break the habit. I know it's not that easy, but you can begin to see the way around this particular issue, because then you recognize the fact that this is not something that you're condemned to do for the rest of your life, and you can break the habit. All you have to do is start looking at it from a different perspective. Because if it's something is relatively, that's the key word here, relatively simple as switching chairs, then you recognize the fact that you've got your habits connected to certain specific behaviors. And once you start identifying those behaviors, you can begin to break the habit. Change some of the behaviors, you'll change or eliminate the habit. Okay? This is what happens a lot of times. If you may remember when you were in school, or maybe you're still in school, if you study at the dining room table and that's where you study, odds are you're going to sit in the same place you eat when you sit when you have a meal, because this is what most people do. They, wherever their spot at the table is, when they go down to study, they sit in their chair. And I can just about guarantee, once you sit down to study, within about 20-30 minutes, you're going to want to get up and have a snack, because you're associating the table with eating. Way to break this is to change your chair and go sit in somebody else's seat. So if you're a child, go sit in a parent's seat. You can still study, but the odds are you're not going to have quite as strong an urge to eat, because you're not sitting in the spot at the table that you use to eat. Does all of this make sense? Can you begin to see how some of the behaviors, the triggers, because what you're doing is you're putting certain things together and they get to be really close together. The eating or the smoking or whatever behavior you're looking at is connected with something else, like where you sit at the table or the room you're in, or whatever it is that you're doing when you smoke, or any other behavior for that matter. So if you tend to find yourself getting angry at your children, is there a specific thing that seems to set you off, a specific time of day? What's the specific trigger that you can see that's connected to this? Because I suspect that more often than not, you will realize that you don't commit the behavior or the thing you don't want to do all the time. There are certain circumstances in which you do this. So the question is what are those circumstances? What are those triggers? Once you can begin to recognize what the triggers are, you can begin to start thinking about how you want to go about breaking this particular habit. Now, sounds easy, difficult in practice, but at least you get a better idea of what's going on, which allows you to have a better chance to change that behavior, especially when you think in terms of all the other things that go around this particular behavior to make you want to do whatever it is that you want to break, whether it's eating, smoking, getting angry, whatever that may be. Does this make sense? Can you begin to see some of the patterns that you're engaging in? I hope so. Let me know. And if you have any questions, hit reply and ask me about that, and we'll see what we can come up with the next time we talk about this. I hope you're finding this helpful. I really do. Please let me know. So you have a good week. Try and stay as cool as you can, because I know the weather's warm, or really warm, really, really warm. So do what you can, and we will see you next week. Bye.